The Ural Mountains in winter are unforgiving. Temperatures drop to -30°C, and blizzards can arrive without warning. In January 1959, 10 young hikers set out from the city of Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, for a ski trek through the northern Urals. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student and experienced wilderness guide. He had planned this route carefully. The other members were fellow students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute. All were ranked at or above the second category of Soviet hiking difficulty. Their destination was Otorten, a mountain whose name in the local Mansi language translates roughly as "do not go there." It was a fitting warning. One member, Yuri Yudin, fell ill early in the journey and turned back. He would be the only one to survive. He lived until 2013, never knowing what happened to his friends. The remaining 9 continued north. Their plan was to reach Otorten, complete the trek, and return by February 12th. Nobody heard from them again. When they failed to return on schedule, family members raised the alarm. A search and rescue operation was launched by the Soviet authorities. On February 26th, searchers located the abandoned campsite on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, a name that translates in Mansi as Dead Mountain. What they found was immediately strange. The tent had been cut or torn open from the inside. All 9 hikers were gone. Footprints in the snow led away from the tent toward the tree line below. The hikers had left in a hurry, and they had left without proper clothing or shoes. The first 2 bodies were found near the edge of the forest, at the foot of a large Siberian cedar tree. They wore only underwear. Branches on the cedar had been broken as high as 5 meters up, suggesting someone had climbed the tree, possibly to look back toward the camp. Between the tree and the tent, 3 more bodies were found in a line. The position suggested they had been trying to return to the camp when they died. One of those 3 was Igor Dyatlov himself. Another was Zinaida Kolmogorova. Both showed signs of extreme physical effort, as though they had been crawling uphill. The remaining 4 were found much later, in May, after the snow thawed. They had been buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine. These 4 showed injuries that the first 5 did not. 3 had severe chest trauma, broken ribs, crushed sternums. 1 had a fractured skull. The force required to cause those internal injuries was compared by the medical examiner to a high-speed car crash. Yet there were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin. One of the 4, Lyudmila Dubinina, was missing her tongue, eyes, and parts of her lips. This detail has fueled speculation ever since. Investigators at the time noted that some of the hikers' clothing showed elevated levels of radioactivity. The source was never conclusively explained. The Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers died from a compelling natural force. The case was classified, and the files were sealed for decades. That vague conclusion satisfied no one, and when the files were finally declassified in the 1990s, the questions only multiplied. Investigators, journalists, and researchers have since proposed dozens of explanations. Most fall into a handful of broad categories. The most widely discussed natural theory involves avalanche. An unexpected snow slab could have struck the tent, forcing the group to cut their way out and flee. This would explain the hasty exit and the chest injuries. Slab avalanches can produce crushing force without leaving surface bruises. A 2021 study published in the journal Nature Communications used computer modeling to show that a delayed slab avalanche was physically plausible on that slope. However, the avalanche theory has significant critics. Experienced searchers who reached the scene found no evidence of an avalanche path. The snow around the tent was largely undisturbed. A second natural theory centers on infrasound. Certain wind conditions over mountain passes can produce low-frequency sound waves that humans cannot hear but can physically feel. Some researchers have proposed that infrasound could trigger intense panic, disorientation, and a primal flight response, potentially explaining why the group fled without rational preparation. This remains a theory. No direct evidence links infrasound to the Dyatlov Pass events, and it does not explain the physical injuries found on 4 of the 9. A third category of theory involves human causes, either a confrontation with military personnel or an accidental weapons test in the area. The Ural region was an active area for Soviet weapons development. Some researchers point to the radioactivity found on the clothing as a potential clue. However, the radioactivity levels recorded were relatively low, and investigators at the time suggested contamination from earlier use of radioactive equipment on other expeditions. The military involvement theory has never been supported by documentary evidence, though some researchers argue that relevant Soviet records may still be withheld. There are also theories involving the indigenous Mansi people of the region. The pass sits near land the Mansi considered sacred. Early Soviet investigators did question local Mansi, but found no evidence of conflict. No physical evidence has ever linked the Mansi to the deaths. Perhaps the most speculative category involves Kármán vortex streets, atmospheric phenomena that can create powerful, localized wind phenomena near certain terrain shapes. Researchers have noted that the shape of Kholat Syakhl could, under specific weather conditions, generate sudden and violent wind events without producing a visible avalanche. What is agreed upon by most serious researchers is this: the hikers left the tent in an extreme hurry, driven by something they perceived as an immediate, lethal threat. They were experienced enough to know that leaving shelter in those temperatures without clothing was itself a death sentence. Whatever they feared inside was worse. The group then apparently separated. Some tried to build a fire near the cedar tree. Others attempted to return to the tent. All failed. The 4 in the ravine had apparently tried to build a snow den for shelter, an intelligent survival decision, suggesting at least some in the group were still thinking clearly. This detail complicates the infrasound panic theory somewhat. Rational shelter building is not consistent with complete, sustained psychological breakdown. The missing soft tissue on Lyudmila Dubinina is now largely explained by investigators as the result of natural decomposition and animal activity. Over the months, the body lay under snow. That explanation is considered plausible by forensic pathologists, though it was not the conclusion widely reported during the early years of public fascination with the case. In 2019, Russian prosecutors reopened the case. After a fresh investigation, they announced in 2020 that their official conclusion was a snow avalanche. That conclusion was met with widespread skepticism. Critics pointed out that the new investigation did not resolve the question of why no avalanche evidence was found at the scene. The Dyatlov Pass Foundation, founded by surviving family members and researchers, continues to advocate for a more thorough and transparent investigation. What we can say with confidence is this: 9 experienced, capable people died in circumstances that remain, at minimum, incompletely explained. The physical evidence is real. The injuries were severe and unusual. The radioactivity was documented. The tent was cut from the inside. These are facts, not interpretations. What caused those facts remains genuinely unknown. Every theory that explains some of the evidence struggles to explain all of it. That is what makes Dyatlov Pass different from many historical mysteries. It is not a case where evidence is simply absent. It is a case where the evidence points in multiple directions at once. The 9 who died there were real people with futures ahead of them. Igor Dyatlov had planned to marry. Lyudmila Dubinina was one of the group's most enthusiastic members. They deserved to be remembered not as characters in a puzzle, but as people. And the question of what happened to them deserves a genuine answer. That answer has not come yet, and until it does, the slope of Dead Mountain will remain one of history's most haunting unanswered questions. If you found this mystery as compelling as we did, subscribe for more stories from history's unanswered questions.